Hello everybody, in this video I want to talk about some of the common misunderstandings we see around physical self-defense. So true self-defense, true self-protection is much broader than just the physical, which we've talked about before. You need to consider the nature of criminal behavior, the nature of abusive relationships, home security, travel security. You need to look at criminal statistics. You need to look at legal things. You need to look at communication skills, de-escalation skills, escape skills, and on and on and on. It's a much bigger field than just the fighting. Now, as we know, what a lot of martial artists do, it's that old adage, if all you have is a hammer, then every problem's a nail. They'll reduce the entirety of this broad-based self-defense, they'll reduce it down to physical. It's just fighting, right? You know, that's the way that they tend to view it, and they'll ignore all the other stuff. But even then, when it comes to the physical stuff, they often get it wrong. Because there's a series of things that martial artists get confused about. Based on their martial arts training, they wrongly extrapolate from that what self-defense will be like. It reveals the fact that they're not really clear on what they're talking about. So there's lots to it, but what I'd like to do in this video is break down three key points when it comes to the purely physical side of self-defense that I think a lot of martial artists get wrong. The first one that we're going to look at is a belief that self-defense is like all-in hard martial arts sparring, right? And one of the things I really don't like it, but I get the phrase, I get why people use it. So I'm not saying everyone who uses this phrase in this way is problematic, but the phrase itself can be problematic. It's calling physical self-defense a street fight, right? You know, because all they've done there is a fight, but in the street. So you've got a fight in the gym or the dojo or the cage or on the mat or whatever it is, and now we have a fight in the street. We've just moved the location. There's one of my instructors calls it martial arts in genes, right? We've moved the location and now we're looking at, you know, it's essentially the same thing, right? But it's not. And the reason it's not the same thing is the two people involved in that, two people minimum, and there may well be more, which is another big issue, is will have differing goals to what they will have in there. And once the goal changes, everything else changes. As I've mentioned before, the goal will determine the strategy will determine the tactics will determine the choice of use of technique, right? If you change the goal, everything changes, right? So if you went, my aim is to win the fight, okay? What fight? Okay, like it's a boxing match, right? This is how you would go about doing that. My aim is to win the fight. It's a judo bout. Again, it's totally different, right? Once you change the aim is to win, but once you change that context, everything else changes underneath it. And what people tend to do is they go, well, how we're training now is how it will happen in the real world. That's what physical self-defense will be like. How we spar is what physical self-defense will be like. And that's not it. That's not how it works at all. It's very different. So we look at the criminal's objective. Their objective is to get whatever they want, right? It's not their aim to prove they're a better fighter than you. They may want to hurt you because they're angry. They may want to rob you. They may want to assault you in some way. They're doing it because they get something from it. The violence they will use is a tool to get that thing, right? They're not going to want a square go or a fight with you, right? It's not in their interest to do that. Criminals don't walk up and, excuse me, would you mind if I could fight you for your wallet? You know, it doesn't work that way. Okay, you know, ding, ding, round one, let's go. It's not how it works. Their aim is not to win the fight. The fight is something they don't want. What they want to do is overwhelm you with violence. Now, if you look at it from our perspective, like our aim, again, is not to win the fight. Our aim is to avoid harm. Right? Talk a little bit more about that in the moment. The reason I choose that definition of avoid harm is it's more inclusive. So I'll use examples. You know, if I ended up on a life support machine, then I've survived. Because people go, I aim at self-defense is survival. Survival isn't a good outcome. If I go to prison, that's not a good outcome, right? If I'm emotionally scarred by it all, you know, that's not a great outcome either. So the aim of self-defense is to avoid harm, whether that be physical harm, financial harm, emotional harm, mental harm. You know, I'm trying to avoid all of that. And then because of that, you know, this is why these skills like communication skills and awareness skills and the knowledge of criminal behavior are so important. because you're more likely to avoid harm if you can avoid the physical rather than that being your only option, which unfortunately, the way that most martial artists teach self-defense is it's a purely physical thing. So they're more likely to get harmed because all these other more effective things that are easier for most people, common garden people, to pick up and to be able to use effectively, to get them to look at their own lives and lifestyle and where they may potentially at risk and do something to mitigate those risks, they're way more effective than teaching them how to kick, punch, knee, elbow and throw, in terms of avoiding harm, right? So your aim is to avoid harm and the criminal wants what they want. You have asymmetrical goals. Right? When we spar with each other in the dojo, we often have symmetrical goals. Right? Sometimes you'll do asymmetrical drills; they can be really useful. But general sparring is symmetrical. Competitive martial arts, it's always symmetrical. You are trying to achieve exactly the same thing I'm trying to achieve. You're trying to throw me onto my back. You're trying to pin me, submit me. You're trying to knock me out. You're trying to score X number of points. You have the same goal as the other person. As soon as the goals change and you've got asymmetrical goals, everything else changes underneath it. The strategies, the tactics, and everything that the criminal is going to use, their choice of technique is going to be different from yours as well, right? Because you have, a differing objective there. It's going to be, you're not trying to achieve the same things. So it's radically different. And I think what happens here is it's a matter of convenience. So because people understand, well, I've had loads of fights in the dojo and I've had loads of competitive fights, I understand how they work. So for self-defense, I'll just move that fight into the street, I'll call it a street fight, and I'll think it's the same. It really isn't. It really isn't. It is radically different when it comes to the physical side of it. Criminals, they're going to use numbers, deception, weapons, all that kind of stuff. And again, because your objective is to avoid harm here, your aim is not to win the fight. Your aim is to avoid harm. So what you're really trying to do is facilitate your own escape. Right, which will mean, causing sufficient damage or disorientation or incapacitation so that when you flee, they can't come after you. Right, that's what we're going to do. And then there are skills associated with that fleeing as well. It needs to be something that's practiced. So to give an example, how many people do you know that regularly practice escaping in the dojo? Right, and I would say it'd be less than 1%. They'll practice fighting to a submission or a win. They'll do that a lot. They'll do that as the default. But how many times do you have it where you go, right, what I want you to do is I want you to fight and I want you to escape to this zone here. And these people are going to be bystanders and there's going to be 2 of them you've got to escape from and you've got to get past them. You've got to do sufficient escape and you've got to get to here. And the people playing the roles of the bad guys, you keep it safe and controlled. You are going to act as criminals act. You're not going to stand there with your guard up bobbing and weaving, right? It's not going to work that way. How many times do you practice that? And if you're not practicing it, it's not going to be the default when you need it. It's not going to be there, right? You may say, well, I would do it, but if you've never practiced it, I guarantee you won't do it. What you'll do is you'll fall into fighting mode. And because you're fighting for the win, all the opportunities you may have had to get out of there, to get you and your loved ones out of there, you will not take because you will not see them and you will not have practiced doing it. So when it comes to the physical side of things, we need to be very mindful that the goal has shifted, the objective has shifted. And that makes the type of conflict we see radically different. Now, of course, strong punches count in both. There is some crossover. But it's what a friend of mine, Jamie Clubb, calls the byproduct myth. People overemphasize these crossovers because it is a sliver, it's a thin crossover. And then people go, well, that's in both. Therefore, if I just train for this thing, it'll give me the skills for that thing. It will not. So that's the first one that I want to discuss with you. And I hope some of this is useful. We'll build on it in the other bits as well. But there's that idea that once the goal changes, the nature of that physical confrontation will be very different. Very, very different. And you need to be aware of those differences and train accordingly. So the first one that we talked about is a bit all-encompassing. The goal changes, everything changes. But to narrow it down a little bit and to explore another area, I think one of the big problems we see is the maintenance of a dueling mindset. So by that, what I mean is a dueling mindset is when me and another person, or you and whoever, agree to fight. You agree how you're going to fight, when you're going to fight, what the rules are of the fight, and how we determine what a win is going to be. That's how most fighting within the martial arts world works. We're going to start sparring now. We're going to end sparring now. While we're doing this sparring, this is what we're allowed to do. This is what we're not allowed to do. These are the techniques that we're going to count. These are the ones that we're going to prohibit. So, for example, if you went to you boxing or kickboxing and you suddenly grabbed somebody through them and tried to submit them on the ground, right? That's not allowed. You're getting disqualified. You've lost. You do a judo bout, you throw the guy and try to submit him, you're doing exactly the right thing, right? It's as we said before, once the goal changes, everything else changes with it as well. But part of that is that have that dueling mindset because of that conditioning. Me and my partner agree to go, and this is how we go. So that they think of it in those terms. So what they're looking to do, therefore, again, is to win the fight. And as we talked about, that can be problematic. One example that we've already touched on is you miss opportunities to escape. That can be a problem. The other thing is, in doing so, and we'll move on to this on the next one as well, you can get yourself into legal and trouble and tactical trouble by maintaining that mindset. And one big part of that is, if you look at crime statistics, which again, you need to understand the problem if you're going to come up with a solution. Here in the UK, around 40% of all violent crime, where the people aren't known to one another, involves more than one person. That's a huge number, right? It's a huge number. So it's another thing. In the dojo, are you consistently training for escaping and dealing with multiple opponents? Now, here's the thing. I often hear people say they are, and then when I watch them do it, they go, I'll spar with you for a little bit, while this person stands there, then I'll spar with you for a little bit. And it's still a sparring match. They're just sparring two people kind of in turns. That's not it. You know what I mean? Do you understand how they'll try and get snipers in position, how they'll use dialogue to try and deceive you? And that's where the physical thing will start from, right? So you need awareness of this to understand the kind of tactics criminals are going to employ. So when you physically go, right, now I've got to go, I've got to fight to try and facilitate my escape here. How do you best achieve that? Dealing with multiple enemies is another topic, but again, it needs to be considered. But in a duel, combat sports, it's pretty much always one-on-one, right? You know what I mean? Is you and the other person are agreeing to fight for a win. You're dueling. That's essentially what you're doing. You're dueling, and people maintain that dueling mindset. You see that a lot on the physical side of things as well. So I have seen, and I'm sure you have too. I remember, the example that's leaping to mind is reading a martial arts magazine once, and there's a martial artist in there, incredibly skillful guy, very well known, very well respected in his field. Clearly doesn't fully understand self-defense though, because when he's showing self-defense techniques, it's got him and his partner from 10 feet away with the guards up. Right? That's not how it works. Right? If you end up 10 feet away with your guards up, you and the criminal have both done very dumb things there. They've been dumb because it's not in their interest, their criminal objectives, their moral objectives. It's not in their interest to go, let's go, I'll fight you for it. It's not. And also, if you're 10 feet away with your guard up, you shouldn't be 10 feet away with your guard up. Right? At that point, you've got enough space to start considering escape options, right? And if they close the gap, then you've got means to increase that distance, which comes to escape skills. You shouldn't be going, okay, let's go. Let's have the kind of guard up and let's rock with this. Let's fight to a win. Give another example, which I've talked about before, but I think it's one you'll all recognise. It's an easy one to get across to people. What do they do in MMA bouts when they're punching and the partner hits the floor, their opponent hits the floor? Right, as soon as they do that, they typically will move in, get the knee on the belly or whatever it happens to be, get themselves in a good position and continue to hit, right, as much as they can until they either tap out or the referee intervenes, and then in which case they've won. And that's 100% right. That is the right way to achieve the objective in that context. That's exactly what they should do. But if you then go, I'll maintain that dueling mindset, that's how I win. I beat the other guy to a pulp, and I'll move that across to self-defense. Again, that's very problematic. Because you hit the guy on the ground, there was an opportunity for escape there, you move in and start punching, right? There could well be friends or accomplices of this people you've missed, and you're super vulnerable. They've got a free shot to their attack. Second attack. Also, what about other people that might get involved? They see you kneeling on a guy and punch them in the face. They may well think you're the aggressor. So you can suddenly have well-meaning bystanders starting to attack you as well because you've created the impression that you are the aggressor. Then, as I've talked about before, criminals by their nature are dishonest people, right? When the police show up and say what's going to go on, they're not going to get up and go, yeah, I started that, it was my fault. They're going to go, look what he did to me. That lunatic was kneeling on me, punching on my face till that man got him off me. They'll tell you. You'll find yourself going away with your handcuffs tied up, right? With hands in handcuffs, you'll find yourself in the back of a police van. because you've harmed yourself. Remember, the aim is to avoid harm by the maintenance of a dueling mindset. You wanted to win the fight, right? And that isn't the aim. The aim is to avoid harm. So I think that's another huge one. And I know why people do it. Right? And it is, if you follow the logic through, it is quite baffling. So no one would believe that if you train in judo, it will make you a great boxer. That if you trained in points karate, you're set up for your first MMA fight. Everyone would acknowledge that they are different disciplines, right? That require different skills. I can't for the life of me figure out why physical self-defense is just regarded as being the easy, simple one, the default one. You know, that if you can box, you can do self-defense. If you do judo, you can do self-defense. No one would go, if you can box, you can do judo. It's its own thing. It's its own thing. I think another one as well with it that we often see is there's sometimes a martial arrogance. You know, they'll say, oh, well, if you work against a trained opponent in a competition, it will work against a unskilled guy on the street. Again, that reveals to me, and I would say anyone who's studied this stuff in depth, a huge series of misunderstandings in that single statement. One is, it's a fight in the street. That one's present there as well. But again, the failing to understand the goals have changed. The failing to understand it's a different form of conflict with different objectives. They're also vastly undervaluing what criminals do. So the criminal is highly unlikely to be trained in exactly the same martial arts discipline as you, right? So people go, well, they're untrained, and I'm trained, so I'll easily destroy them. It's an arrogance that will get you into trouble, because although the criminal may not be the most skilled martial artist in the world, right, they are skilled criminals. They have lots of regular practice of using violence in order to achieve their own objectives, right? Which is why, going back to the first point, they're not going to fight you in the way that you're used to people fighting you. They will use deception, dialogue, intimidation, numbers, surprise, weapons. They will use whatever advantages they can get. And often as not, most people are taken out before they even realize they're in a fight. Which takes us back to the non-physical skills. You need to be able to see these warning signs and how things are developing. You need your awareness there. You need your communication skills. You need your de-escalation skills. But if all you've got is the ability to punch people really hard and other such martial skills, what will happen is that the criminal may seem to be your best friend in the moment. And then suddenly, boom, they've taken you out. The best analogy for this ever is from Peter Considine, right? Who's one of my instructors, right? Really does get this stuff to a degree that I personally feel is unequaled. But just because of his very broad experience in a lot of different fields. But when Peter says, he says, when martial artists duel each other, fight each other, it's like they're sitting down to play chess. He says, when they move to self-defense, a lot of martial artists sit down expecting an advanced game of chess. And they're surprised when the criminal throws the pieces at them and then tries to smash their head in with the board. Right? And he then goes on to say, there's no doubt you're still the best chess player. The mistake you made was assuming that they were playing chess. Right? They're not going to play the same game as you, because that's not in their objectives to do it. So while it's true that in your environment, if you were a great full contact fighter, a great kickboxer, right, you may find that the 99.9% of the criminals out there, if they face you in a kickboxing ring, they might not last 30 seconds. Right? But that's not the game they're playing. Right? They are going to behave as criminals behave. And those skills may not help you unless you understand the wider things, right? Like for example, the one will deceive you. You might get a sniper taking a shot. If you've never learned to deal with that, you're going to be in a whole host of trouble. If you've never considered the escaping skills and disengaging skills and all that kind of stuff, you're going to be in trouble for it. A lot of rules, combat sports, for example, even have rules against that. You're not allowed to avoid conflict or combat because they want you to fight. In a lot of cases, if you get penalised for not engaging. But for self-defense, what do you want to do? I want to not engage at all. I might have to engage if it's got to the physical point. But my aim is to get out of there, to avoid harm. Using the very same skills that every form of combat sports, instant you try and do it, they'll go, no. You know what I mean? Points off against you, or you've got a warning, you know what I mean? Get in there and fight him. Stop kind of breaking grips and disengaging. It's radically different. Very, very different. So I think the solution to this is people need to understand what criminal violence is like more, study it more, talk to people who are genuine experts in that field, not talk to martial artists who may think they are, you know, based on the physicality. You know, I mean, certainly that's what, you know, what my big path was. You know, I realized quite early on that, you know, the way we fight each other, as wonderful as it is, and as much as I enjoy it, I spend a lot of time training for it, and I'd much rather do that all day than have anything to do with self-defense, right? Really, really do like doing that stuff. It's a massive amount of fun, but I knew this isn't how it works. So I start talking to as many people as I can who've been there and done that in various contexts, because no one's done it all, and I want to learn from them as much as I possibly can. So that way when I teach this stuff, I teach it and practice it effectively. Yeah, so that's another big one. Watch out for that, you know, the maintenance of a dueling mindset. We're not dueling. It's now physical self-protection. The final one we're going to discuss here is the failure to consider non-physical consequences. So I've alluded to that a little bit in the other two parts. So legal, for example, is a big one, right? You need to consider the legal consequences of what your actions are going to be. And how are you going to conduct yourself? So, and you see this, what most martial artists do at this point, they don't know this stuff. So the good ones, the good martial artists go, I don't know this, I need to know this, I'm going to find out about it. That's a responsible thing to do. That's what a lot of people do. I certainly know lots of people in my sphere, that's exactly what they've done. But you do see more commonly what people will go is, I'll ignore the problem. I'll swerve off. I don't want to do any work here. So you'll hear those get-outs, you know, better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6, you know, that kind of stuff, you know. So just ignore the law and kill the guy, you know, or you'll get killed, you know, which is nonsense, right? It's false to say that your only consequences are to go to prison or die. That's not how self-defense works, right? Or they'll say things like, you know, well, you can't consider the law in the middle of a street fight. Well, you know, there's a problem in street fight again, but they are right that in the heat of the moment, you can't be remembering, what does the Criminal and Justice and Immigration Act say about that? That's not the time, but you consider it in training. So what we do is we look at what the law is, what the law permits and doesn't. And here in the you know, England and Wales, the law is, I think, is very well worded. You know, there's lots in there. It is unreasonable to expect you to judge to a nicety the level of force used. You're judged on your honestly held belief, even if that belief was mistaken, and even if it was unreasonable, you know what I mean, so long as it was honestly held. The exception being voluntary intoxication. You know, if you've taken something that leads to, or drunk something that leads to unreasonable beliefs, you can't rely on them. But if you're sober and make a mistake, the law's okay with that. It acknowledges you can't judge to a nicety the level of force used. That's exactly what it says. It says that honest and instinctive action is strong evidence that only reasonable force was used. You know, so if you act in an honest and instinctive way, the main reason I like teaching the law when I'm teaching self-defense is when people actually see what it is, they stop worrying about it. You know, they go, right, all I really need to do is act on my honestly held beliefs in a way that's honest and instinctive, and I don't need to worry about judging to a nicety the level of force used, right? Then we've got to remind them that the goal is to avoid harm, right? It's not to extract vengeance or give people a beating. So we condition ourselves through training that when the other person is a sufficient distance away or when they hit the ground, your instinct is woof, and now I'm creating space. Now, often, you know, hands up in a way that's clear to everybody, you wanted nothing to do with it, your arms are ready to use should other people come in, you've still got them up ready to work, and as you disengage, you know, like stay back, don't hurt me, right? You know, something along those lines, you know, so it's clear this person may need help, you know what I mean, that person's the bad person, you know, they'll rehearse this thousands of times in the dojo in the various drills we do, so when it comes to the crucial moment, it's instinctive. And again, you can compare that with if people haven't considered those non-physical consequences. So we talked about the MMA example. People will jump on them and start punching them because that's what you should do in MMA. That could have legal consequences because you will look like the aggressor, because you condition yourself to look like the aggressor. When a person hit the floor, you don't need to be on top of them punching them. The smart, tactical, strategic thing to do at that point is get out of dodge. But if you've not practiced that, you will not do it because it's not part of the habits that you've conditioned yourself to have. So there's that element. The other one that I'll say, like if you look at like points karate, it's quite common so let's say someone does a really nice sweep and they land on the floor, they'll drop that big punch in and it's they'll do the great ki, it looks awesome, the crowd loves it, judges flag shoot up, exactly the right thing to do. You did something awesome, make it look even more awesome and make sure everyone's seen it, right? Exactly right. Move the context. Right? You do the same thing in a self-defense scenario, you could look insane. Right? You look crazy. There is a time for KIs in that. You may be doing it because there's other people and you want to, other attackers, and you may want to intimidate a little bit. That can work as well. It's all part of it. But as a general default, it might not be the right thing to do, right? And certainly standing there, having your moment of glory, not the right thing to do. If the person's down, you want to be creating space, right? In most scenarios. The other one with it, I think, is sometimes as well, is for those who do consider themselves more reality-based martial arts, sometimes there's a reveling in violence, right? People want to be their own little John Wick. You know what I mean? That's what I am. So I will do unnecessary degrees of damage to this person. So they'll condition them. The person hits the ground and you stamp on his skull. You make sure he can't get back up again. You'll see people doing that stuff. And then again, you leave that guy brain damaged or dead, right? And you stamped on his skull. Was it necessary to stamp on his skull? Was stamping on his skull something that was needed to ensure your safety? It clearly wasn't. If he's down maybe. I can see a situation where it could be, but most of the time, no. Which is like for my own personal training, me being me, as soon as someone hits the ground, my main thing is I stamp hard on the legs. I've practiced it, I've conditioned it. I will drive my heel right through all that meat into the marrow of that bone. They are going to struggle to stand. They're going to struggle to walk for weeks, right? But I'm not going to cause any permanent damage to them, right? So it's all part of the escape plan, right? I'll stop them following me. But I've done sufficient damage, but I haven't caused anything that's life-threatening or life-altering, right? Because I'm considering the non-physical potential problems as well of it. So that needs to be considered. And again, it's not about how violent you can be. Seen this as well. Remember sitting once at an event watching a martial arts class was going on. I was teaching. And there was like a glass window and there was a martial arts class going on the other side, you see. And they were doing some knife work. So when we weren't teaching, and this guy, when it comes to knives, one of the world's top guys, right? No doubt, lots of real life experience of dealing with real knives, right? And we're there and we're watching them do and it was all very basic and simple. And I'm watching, I'm thinking, this looks good to me. But he's the expert. He's sitting there, I like it. And then at one point, right, the knife fell out the guy's hand. Right, so they're doing this little drill. It wasn't really a disarm as such, it just went, so the guy flops to the floor and the knife came out of his hand. Right, the guy immediately picks up the knife, the guy who was the defender, and repeatedly stabbed him. Right, to which is, the instructor kind of like, yeah, good. And I was like, no, not good, murder. Right. The guy, it was disarmed and that's exactly what he rolled his eyes. There was no need. The weapon had gone. He could have kicked it away. That would have been a better thing to do. So the person that was using it no longer has it. He's down and on the floor anyway. You know what I mean? There's no need to suddenly, there's a knife. I'll get it and I'll stab him with it. Because it's not the right thing to do, right? So I think sometimes we see that too. People want to be John Wick violent. I'm my own little John Wick. I'm my own little superhero. Any problems in the world, I will show up like Batman and deal with it, right? That's again not smart at all, right? The physical side of it is about ensuring your safety and those of around you, right, to avoid harm. So there's legal. We also need to cover things like, emotional harm. You could have a very traumatic experience in physical self-defense, right, and that can lead to long-lasting issues. And sort of emotionally, mentally, these things can really take a toll if you have a very traumatic experience. The ongoing legal processes can have the same effect on you, right? So if our aim is to avoid harm, we go, right, what we need to do here then is to make sure that we don't have those mental and physical consequences, which is why the non-physical skills are so important. Because if you're able to effectively de-escalate somebody and get out of there, to just kind of, or effectively escape or recruit bystander help or whatever it happens to be, or you've got enough awareness of criminal behavior, you see a situation a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes before it gets to the point of being physical, and you can get out of there, you leave thinking, oh, God, I did well there, God, I'm so switched on. None of the hassles are going to follow you with that, you see. But if all you've got is, I can punch people, you're always going to have that, because that's the only thing you've got. So but when it comes to the physical side of things, we need to remember that there can be these non-physical harms. So again, it's a lovely phrase by Mark McYoung, where he said, you've got two problems with self-defense. He goes, one if it works and one if it doesn't. So if it doesn't work, obviously you get harmed. If it does work, you could suddenly have all kinds of legal issues and everything else. So we need to be aware of what the law is and ensure that our actions are within it. And again, I know some people, I should just be able to do whatever I want, but I don't think we want a society where every individual is allowed to enact their own vengeance and be judge and jury for anyone who ever does anything to them, right? Personally, I think it's right that the courts deal with all that kind of stuff, right? That's how it works. My aim is not to give this guy the beating of his life for daring to attack me. My aim is to make sure I'm okay. That I'm okay that I'm still able to support my loved ones and I'm still there for my friends and everybody else. That's my job. And so that's what we train for, right? And then, the legal side of things are there to pick up the aftermath. And I don't want to be part of that. So I'll condition myself to make sure that I consider these non-physical things so that when I'm training in a physical way, I also aim to avoid those harms as well. And not just, give the guy the beating of his life. So I hope you found that enjoyable and there's some interesting food for thought in there. I think for, anyone doing things well will go, I get all that, we do all that. Doesn't hurt to be reminded of it though, because these things are quite common and you could be very well-meaning and just accidentally kind of drift off. And I think it's important that we kind of remind ourselves that if we are talking about self-defense, then we need to make sure that's exactly what we're teaching. If we're talking about other things, which, that's great, other things. That's one of the other ones that I always don't like is where people tend to view self-defense as the ultimate value of any martial art. Some of them, you do them because you're good for your health. You do them because you find it fun and exciting. You do it because you find it massively interesting. You do it because you enjoy spending time with people. The people you spend time with are cool people. You like the company. Now, I love all of that too. You know what I mean? It's something I really enjoy doing. The self-defense part of it is one part of it. It's not the sole reason I train in martial arts. But when we're doing it, we need to get it right. So the first thing we need to consider is that there is a wide array of skills before we even get to the physical. But even when we get to the physical side of self-protection is different from fighting. It's not the same thing. It's like we said before, you've got consensual violence, which is where two people agree to fight one another, and you've got non-consensual violence, where one person hurts and the other person doesn't consent to it. And those broad categories are very different. People often downplay the differences. And when they do that, in these conversations, what I quickly see is that they're doing it because they don't want to make the effort to learn something new. Or they're doing it because they don't understand that there's a difference in the first place. Like anyone who understands the differences that exist there is totally okay with that concept. They may not use those terms, but they'll go, yeah, no, of course, it's different. Any form of consensual violence, or symmetrical violence, is by definition different from asymmetrical, non-consensual criminal violence. The way it plays out is different. Criminals don't behave like people in duels. Mindset of the criminal is not that of a duel, and if yours is, you're going to be in trouble, right? We need to kind of look at the problem of criminal violence as it is, and then work for the best possible solutions to that. And the physical side of it is there's a lot gone wrong. Not who's to blame wrong, just unfortunate wrong. But there's a lot gone wrong when we've reached that point where it now has to be physical. Right? And even then, it won't be the same as any kind of consensual dojo sparring you do. So in my own dojo, we do a mix of stuff, right? Because that's what the students like doing. So we do a lot of consensual violent stuff. Guards up, moving around, working to get grips, punches, kicks, throws, all that kind of fun stuff. Take each other down, work and try and maybe get a submission. It's great fun. They love it. I think martial artists enjoy fighting other martial artists. It's great. But then we'll also do the non-consensual violence drills where now there's maybe more than one person and the objective is to escape, or they've got people they've got to work to protect. We'll do that in sparring as well. Right? And I'm always very clear about, okay, that was a consensual violence drill. This is now a non-consensual violence drill. So the students have that right habits for the right things, because they are so different. And sometimes people worry, if you're training for both, is there a chance you might get them mixed up? Not if you're training for them both properly. It's like saying I ride a push bike and a motorbike. Is that a worry? Maybe if I'm on a motorbike, I'll start trying to pedal. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They're so different. There's no part of your brain that goes, these are the same thing. So, and again, I think when people say, there's a danger you might mix them up, I think that's part of the problem. If you're training them both separately and effectively, you have no problem. You can mix them up if you misunderstand the difference, because you'll present one as another, right? But if you understand what one is and the other one is, they are oil and water. They are quite different, you know what I mean? And so you train for them in very different ways. As mentioned, there's certainly being able to throw a good punch will apply to both, you know what I mean? But the crossover is actually quite limited, especially when you start looking at strategies, tactics, goals, all that kind of stuff, choice of technique. There's certain techniques you will use in consensual violence you would never dream of using in non-consensual violence. But things that I do, I've got some of my favorite, like takedowns, for example. I've got some takedowns I really like using. I find really fun to do. I've practiced them a lot. I do them a lot when we spar. I never dream of doing them in self-defense because it put me in a very vulnerable position to other people, if not the person I've just taken down. So so thank you for watching. I hope that there's some food for thought in there. Take these ideas would be my suggestion when you're seeing self-protection material for the physical side of it. See if you're seeing these things. Is it guards up in jeans 10 feet apart? Is it just a fight they've moved into the street and they're calling a street fight? Look out for that kind of stuff. Or is it really good quality material that understands the difference between the two? That's considering, the huge physical difference because of the differing goals. That's considering that a change in mindset is required. And that's considering the non-physical elements of it. They're not just looking to win the fight or cause the other guy as much damage as possible. They're considering it within the framework within which true self-defense and self-protection happens. Self-defense, self-protection, there are legal sides to it. No rules in the street fight, there are. They're called laws. And you can get punished severely if you don't understand them or choose to ignore them, right? You train effectively, you can train for self-defense in a way that will avoid harm, that will make sure that you're able to keep yourself safe and keep yourself on the right side of the law. It's not a false choice. You can do both.